Well, for more on this and the rest of this morning's top stories, we're joined by Tomlinson, political commentator for Young Voices UK. Connor, really good to see you this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Of all, what do you make about these recommendations from SAGE?
Well, SAGE's other recommendation was to introduce vaccine passports, even though they acknowledge that they haven't got any sort of data as to whether the vaccine is evaded by this new variant. And also, when the South African scientist who discovered it, she said, oh, the cases are incredibly mild. So the vaccine passport issue seems to be a sort of solution in search of a problem, as it were. I would say the work from home guidance doesn't particularly fit the proportionality of the new cases that are being seen in England, especially when you can see that the death total is going down consistently, even as the weather gets colder, 10% from last week, despite it going up 75 cases of the new Omicron variant. So I don't really see SAGE's recommendations as being all that advised by, supposedly, the science.
Interesting, though, is that they are finding that the majority of the sequenced infections of Omicron in the UK are in the double vax. Now, as we've seen at the moment, intensive care is full of people who haven't been vaccinated. The big fear, of course, is that this new mutant variant can get around our vaccination programme, which has so far got us out of the crisis. And I suppose the scientists are now saying we haven't got time to wait for any more data. We haven't got time to see if the NHS is going to be overwhelmed. We need to go harder and faster than we would really like to.
Well, I'd just like to correct that statistic about the ICU as well, because the majority of people that are dying from COVID are very elderly and they have pre-existing conditions, and most of them are double vaccinated. We don't have a lot of data on the boosters yet. We only say double vaccinated. So I don't quite see how putting a lot more pressure on the booster program is going to be a surefire. Neither do the vaccine passports. The only thing I would like to an investigation, though, is compared to Germany, for example, who have seen N95 mask restrictions and high rates of vaccination for the mRNAs, mainly Pfizer. They're experiencing a lot more cases at the moment, to the point of where they're now mandating vaccines and locking down the unvaccinated, which is very draconian. I think the UK's success seems to be a lot from AstraZeneca, and I'd like to know if the people that are double jabbed that have Omicron have Pfizer or Moderna or AstraZeneca, because my suspicion would be that the sort of more traditional technology of the AstraZeneca vaccine might be more successful than the mRNA one.
What else do you make, just looking at some of the other stories this morning, Connor, what do you make of this one about Boris Johnson blocking, reportedly, Sajid Javid's plan to ban smoking outside pubs and clubs amid fears added red tape would hamper the hospitality sector's recovery from the coronavirus virus?
So this ban's already come into place, I believe, in like 5 different constituencies, and doesn't seem to have caused too much. But I know the business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, said that he was concerned about the costs involved for hospitality sector to police this sort of thing. I would suggest it's probably more to do with the case of they don't want to lose the tobacco tax revenue, especially at a time where between now and 2050 there's going to be losing a lot of the fuel tax revenue because they're phasing out fossil fuels. So the government's sort of scrambling for places they can still make up the lost costs, especially as spending continues to go up. It does sort of come off the back. I understand why there's the sort of the health secretary is looking into this. I believe it was about 8 million people in the last 50 years have been confirmed to be died of smoking-related causes by a bunch of the charities that investigated this sort of stuff, like Cancer Research. So I understand how it could be a public health issue, but it's also a freedom of choice issue. And there's nothing about increasing the availability of tobacco alternatives. I'm not saying they should be taxpayer sponsored, by the way. Look, for example, the World Health Organization have been pushing this sort of thing, but they also look to ban vaping under that, and vaping is 95% more safe than any sort of tobacco alternative. I'm not saying that they're interchangeable, because some people prefer smoking to vaping, so it is a personal choice issue. But I would be suggested that the Prime Minister and other ministers are more concerned about the money coming in than the freedom of choice to smoke.
By the freedom to choose argument, because in my experience, I'm a non-smoker, and I've always, I've been impartial on whether people smoke or not. It's never bothered me. But one of my dearest friends has cystic fibrosis, and it became apparent to me that it was almost impossible to avoid cigarette smoke. And her freedom of choice was taken away because you had to walk through this wall whenever you're going to the pub of cigarettes. Or if you're waiting outside the airport, for example, for a bus, you're next to the smoking area. There's no choice for the people who want to be away from the smoke. It's a two-way thing, this freedom of choice, isn't it? And, there's no one saying you can't smoke at all, but perhaps there should be a place we don't have to walk through the smoking area to get into the pub or the restaurant or whatever it may be.
Well, it is an incremental move towards you can't smoke at all, because if the government keeps restricting the areas you can smoke, then it's just one short step to saying, okay, no smoking outside, you can only smoke in your own home, and then it's just going to say, okay, well, we found it's so detrimental to your health that we're going to take it away from you. When I was younger, I used to have quite severe asthma, and whenever I used to walk through behind people, when it was a lot more prevalent, when it was still, I remember being in restaurants when there was a smoking and non-smoking section, a place like Nando's, and I used to be sitting there coughing. Now, as a kid, obviously, thought it was a very major inconvenience to me, but at the same time, it is other people's choice, and the only thing you can say is, oh, can you please be a bit more courteous to not puff directly in my face as I'm walking behind you, so I don't have to deal with your secondhand smoke. But at the same time, it's also your responsibility to speak up or move around the person that is engaging that. I don't think it's the government's place to step on people's liberties and say, hey, you can't use that product just because it might be a threat to your health or other people's inadvertently.
Yeah, it's a difficult balancing act, isn't it, Connor?
Mm. Yeah, well, it's the same thing could be said for drinking. For example, you could turn around and say, oh, because of drink driving accidents, the likelihood of people to engage in violent behaviour after a few drinks, we're just going to restrict that. And it seems to be that same sort of thing that was guided the lockdown restrictions. For example, there wasn't a lot of evidence about why banning people from going to pubs past 10 o'clock or having drinks has now been banned in, I think, a few Scandinavian countries and Ireland under new restrictions, is going to increase the spread of COVID beyond theorising that it might make people forget social distancing norms. And so it seems to just be another puritanical way of taking away behaviours that they think are going to be damaging to your health.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about what's going on in Ireland in just a moment.
Yeah, sort of semi-lockdown has been reimposed there. But just finally, you were talking about the revenue that the government get from smoking perhaps being a motivation for Boris blocking these changes by the Health Secretary. Also interesting that Rishi Sunak, according to the Times newspaper this morning, is looking to try and make a few tax cuts ahead of the next election, keen to be not viewed as the Chancellor who does high taxing, high spending.
Well, he's looking to sort of live up to his promise that he made on GB News quite a while ago in an interview where he said, I'm going to be a fiscal conservative because I know it's other people's money I'm spending. Now, everyone had a sort of chuckle when they realised the cost of net zero, and that was essentially a mugger's statement of running up to you and taking your money and saying, hey, don't worry, mate, I'll be really responsible in spending your money. I rather would have kept the money myself, thank you very much. Now he's got a lot of conflict between the Prime Minister. There's a lot of things saying about the Treasury isn't taking orders from the Prime Minister anymore in some capacity. Rishi Sunak's looking to cut income tax by 2%, 2p to the pound. Possible VAT tax cut and also an inheritance tax cut. He seems to be taking a leaflet actually out of the Reform UK Party's standpoint in the recent Sidcup and Bexley by-election, where they said they were going to be raising the income tax threshold from 12,000 to 20,000 to try and increase some social mobility. It's quite popular policy, really. And I think this is mainly a move so he can poise himself to be the successor to Boris, who seems to be mired in turmoil and could be the patsy for bad COVID policy if the party decides to get rid of him around 2024. On his side is obviously the very popular Liz Truss, very popular among the Tory base, and has just been seen rolling all over Estonia in a tank like she's Maggie Thatcher. So I think he's looking at her and seeing a very strong rival to his leadership candidacy and thinking, okay, I'll live up to the low tax promise and see if I can win some goodwill back with the voter base.
Listen, Connor, we really appreciate your time, especially at 6:10 on a Saturday morning, Connor. Thank you very much. Connor Tomlinson there.
We were just
Young Voices UK.
Yeah.